much for being so prompt, because I know it's not the easiest location, even in the building, to find that sort. So thank you for that. So first of all, welcome and apologies. I think we've got a couple of
This chair got apologies from Councillor Williamson, Trelfall, and also the Marinelle, and there may be a couple of others, perhaps depending on travel or whether they make it.
Yeah, but we're quorate, so
Yes, definitely.
Okay, item 2, minutes of the meeting in July. Has everybody had a chance to read through those? Yeah. Okay, thank you. Declarations of interest, does anybody have any? No. Have any public questions?
No public questions, Chair.
Wonderful. I'm going to have to apologise because I can't see a lot of the name papers. So if I just have to look in your direction if you actually want to speak. Sorry about that. So item 5, the police and crime plan, which, unless anybody sat up all night to read it, since we didn't get it till about 5 o'clock yesterday, nobody will have any real comments on it, I don't think. So can I ask Andrew, I mean, first of all, do you want to give some?
Yes. Just to rest assured that this is a working draft at a moment in time, and we're not expecting feedback today. The panel has 4 weeks to feed back to us, either individually or collectively, so until the 12th of November. For any feedback or comments or suggestions on the draft police and crime plan. So, and the reason for that is we ourselves have only just finished closing the survey, so I'm pleased to say that had the highest number of residents respond to a survey before related to consultation on the police and crime plan, with just over 5,000 residents having filled in the online survey relating to the development of the police and crime plan. The Chief Constable has also been working on this in terms of what this means for operational policing, what the projects that we could run, what the initiatives are. We will make budget available, what different models we might want to develop in terms of frontline operational policing, and what that might help us achieve. Everything from investigation models around rape and serious sexual assault, all the way through to neighbourhood and community policing. So there's an awful lot of moving pieces in the development of the police and crime plan. But largely, and thank you to the panel members who took the time to join the consultation event I held with the police and crime panel, that has very much filtered into the development of the plan. So where we're at the minute is very much the first draft and the first meat on the bones around what the 5 priorities are, how we would want to start to deliver against those, what I will be setting out to hold the Chief Constable to account for. And then starting to look at what some outcome measures are. We've got quite a bit of work to do still, and we've welcomed the panel's feedback around those outcome measures for the police and crime plan, and how we've got a lot of work to do with national government. So the panel will be aware that the government has launched the beating crime plan, which will also have a number of measures, scorecards, league tables, whatever we want to call them, for constabularies across the county, across the country, sorry. So we want to make sure that whatever we develop in Lancashire aligns to that, so we don't end up with multiple competing priorities all at the same time. So that's where we're up to with the development of the police and crime panel. Police and crime pan. It was sent last night. You've got 4 weeks as a panel to take part in that ongoing consultation of the development of it. So, Chair, I'll leave it to you how you want the panel to do that, whether you're happy for people to come directly back to us or through you, or whether you want to send out the collective response. That I'll leave that for you to discuss. The only other thing I was going to add, because I went through the priorities of the development of this in quite some detail at the consultation event with the panel, so I won't take up the time again because we had a few hours together to do that. I just thought it might be useful. We will circulate later a copy of the analysis that's been done of the responses to the survey. And I don't know, Chair, whether you'd like me to just run through some highlights of that in terms of the responses, because it's quite interesting, really, and the responses that we've had. So overall, in terms of residents who feel safe, there's a really interesting measure. So residents feel generally, largely safe in Lancashire. So it breaks down by gender. 79% of women feel safe in their community, 80% of men feel safe in their community. The areas that make people feel unsafe, where they've cited that they don't feel particularly safe, predominantly is antisocial behaviour, issues with youths, and visible police presence, all things that we've already picked up as part of the police and crime plan. What we do have is the area that feels the safest in Lancashire is the Ribble Valley, 91%. The area that feels the least safe in Lancashire is Blackpool at 68%, and there's a whole breakdown of each area. So we'll circulate that so you can see that. What is interesting, though, is that whilst people feel safe in Lancashire, the ratings around what people think in terms of confidence that the police would be there if they needed them are much lower. So on average, 65%, sorry, 51% of Lancashire residents are confident that Lancashire police will be there for them when required, and that's lower than the previous 65% rates. And if you link that then through to antisocial behaviour as a priority, people not feeling there's a visible police presence in a hotspot, you can understand why that would develop. So I won't go into it much further than that now, because I could spend a few hours going through this whole presentation back. But largely, what is reassuring is all the things that we talked about in the police and crime panel consultation on the plan is echoed by residents in terms of what they want to see as their priorities, what makes them feel safe or unsafe in Lancashire, and perceptions people have of policing. So it's reassuring that this wholly backs the direction of travel that the panel wanted to see, because it was a real clear steer from members of the panel around what you want to see in that police and crime plan and the things that are already in there.
Yeah, thank you.
Chair.
Yeah, that's useful. I mean, I'm sure people will want to reply directly, comment directly. I don't think there's anything to gain particularly by going through me, but do we want to set up a small subgroup to actually consider it in detail, or are we happy to comment direct to Andrew? And if nobody comments, I'm going to assume that everybody's happy just to comment direct.
Well, what's the time scale? Is it time to set up a small subgroup?
Well, 14th of November. So
Okay. So
there is time. There is time if we felt there was anything to be gained.
Would it come back to a full meeting of this?
It will.
Yeah.
The final draft will come back, I think it's the 6th of December, it comes back, the 6th of December meeting. So basically the timeline that was set up was that I'd hold a consultation meeting with the police and crime panel, which we held, and that was a good couple of hours of real clear feedback. I gave out what the headline priorities, so effectively the skeleton of what the police and crime plan was going to look like. We really pushed that through with the panel. There's some great ideas that came in that was incorporated. This is very much a working draft. We're still working on this continuously as we go. We've got weekly meetings set up that we're drafting and working through. More consultation feedback that comes in, sharpening the outcome measures, working with the Constabulary and with other partners around lots of different ideas we have for initiatives that we want to fund, and the capital programme in particular. So then basically the next step in the stage is that members of the panel feedback to me, the Chief Constable feedback to me, and others do, and then I present the final draft ahead of publication. So
I'm taking from that people are happy to comment directly, and our comments will be included in the final plan. Yeah.
And if anyone does want to grab a coffee with me, or even a quick beer afterwards, I'll even buy.
Okay, that's fine. So, is everybody happy? No more comments on the plan, which is obviously the crucial piece of the panel.
Can the Commissioner just confirm you will send us that result of the
Absolutely, yes.
and then we can have a look at that before we
Absolutely, yeah. It is really interesting, really. And it's a really good, solid data set of 5,000 people. So.
Chair, I wonder if the panel would like a little bit more information on the extensive consultation across different protected characteristics in the county. I know this was raised by Councillor Mustard Dad when you were looking at the scrutiny meeting for myself. Would that be of use to people?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, you're probably aware it's gone out to numerous websites across the county. Obviously our website, but County Council and other websites for people to comment on. But I'm really grateful to Munsif, because I'm telling you, he doesn't let go. He'll say, what have you done? Let's get on with this. And in terms of groups across the county, certainly the Lancashire Council of Mosques, through Lafitte, the chair there, pushed it across over 100 mosque organisations in the county. The Church of England diocese did the same in the county through the Bishop of Blackburn. The churches together in Lancashire again put that across groups. Through Sikhism, through Gulab in Preston again, through his contacts. Both of the main Hindu temples from the Gujarat Hindu Centre and the Baptist Temple in Preston again pushed it across their organisations. The Jewish synagogue, there are two synagogues currently in the county, one Reformed one in Blackpool and an Orthodox one in St Anne's, and again Robert Pincus. You'll have seen all his adverts because he runs the biggest estate agency in the county. But Robert put that out across the Jewish community. Through Disability Northwest, very grateful to Mel, because a lot of people have come across Mel in the travels, who does a fantastic job. Again, and she actually took the time to say, please can you print some off for us, because not everyone can access the internet. And then her staff actually sat down with people, because there are some people with learning difficulties and sight difficulties, and her staff were able to sit down and actually help individuals fill in the survey. The Black and Minority Ethnic Network, which is based in Accrington, again, they put it out across their organisations. As far as young people went, Lancashire Association of Boys and Girls Clubs, which is an extensive organisation across the county. Some of you will be aware of the organisation Night Safe in Blackburn, which deals with very vulnerable young people, particularly those who are out of accommodation. Youth Action also, and IMO in Blackburn again are extensively across East Lancashire and other parts of the county. The Youth Challenge and the University of Cumbria, who train their youth workers, so it's gone out to the youth workers whilst the University of Cumbria, the youth workers are trained in Lancaster, so predominantly from our part of the county. And in terms of LGBTQI, through Ian Ashton and Constabulary, through the Lancs LGBT network, through Horizon, You Are Potential, and Lancs Lancashire Pride. So we've tried our best to try and get as much information and knowledge from different groups, because sometimes these are never hard to reach groups. They're just groups that we need to make sure we tailor communication to suit the audience. And we're very grateful that people are contributing. And actually, this is the largest survey that we've managed to obtain for the plan. So thank you, and thank you to Councillor Dadd, who, as I said, never lets go. So
Can I just say, Councillor Dadd, are you happy with how it's been?
Yeah, well, I'm glad to hear that a wide variety of the community out there has been reached. It'd be interesting to hear how many have actually fed back into the survey, although we've been out to obviously as much as we can, but sometimes you can actually circulate the survey and encourage people to participate. Whether to do it or not, it doesn't matter. But it'll be interesting to hear how many have been able to actually have an input in there. But this is the I've known Andy for a long time. The connection that he has within the community bond sector, within Lancashire, and across obviously that expertise would certainly have helped in trying to reach out to those communities. So thanks very much, Andy, for that. It'll be interesting to hear what the feedback was from those communities, and hope that their feedback is taken on board.
And I think one of the things which building on what Wolves have said is how do we sort of take into account the digitally excluded? A lot of our surveys tend to be on digital platforms. There are adult platforms with dollars, 10% of our population is digitally excluded. We want to take the views of these people on board as well, and they're probably one of some of the more vulnerable groups out there. So I'd be interested to know what these groups have done to include those members as well.
I'll let Andy answer in terms of particular groups. From a digital exclusion perspective, part of the survey was we paid a professional research company to do telecom surveys of 100 residents in every borough. So every borough has had 100 residents to make sure that we've got a balanced data sample, but two, that we are making sure that we're randomly selecting people as well, rather than it just being the usual people who log on and fill on the survey all the time. So that would have reached a whole range of people as well to make sure that we've got that balanced survey. But I'll let Andy talk about it in terms of the particular groups.
Yeah, some of these groups have actually had people help them fill in the survey. I think particularly of the Disability North West group actually. So we got, Hunter was asking for numbers, we got 30 individuals that were helped to fill in the hard copy survey, and then we input those onto the system. There are some other groups that actually invariably don't get asked, and it's been on my heart because when I was in the police, I spent an awful lot of time with young people who go missing from home that are very vulnerable. There are nearly 6,000 of those in the county, and it's taking a while, but again, we're going to be entering into a consultation with those young people who are in the care system, of which there are many thousands, and invariably they are the ones who are in contact with the police much more than any one of us for various reasons. Invariably because they're victims, but sometimes for other reasons as well. So we want to incorporate some of their views, and I meet tomorrow with and start that process to try and make sure we're feeding them, and it's sort of a can't do everything by one website and stuff. So because those individuals, so we're going to set up small focus groups for those. But as far as feeding back to the demographics of who's filled us in, we have certain data that we can do. I can give you those numbers when it's finalised.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Andrew and Andy. Just a quick one, if you don't mind, while I've got you. In terms of the organised crime, there's obviously an unseen crime, which is the cyber crime. Just wondering in terms of what feedback you've had, because invariably what happens with this crime is very shame associated with it, so people are not prepared to sort of, tell you or give you the feedback. So, and I know, like lots of things in our life, this cyber is really shot the way we live now. It's having a bigger influence on our life. I'm just wondering in the context of the feedback, where this fits in.
In terms of the feedback, cybercrime that does feature in the feedback, and I'll make, like I said, make sure you get a copy of all that. In terms of working through the police and crime plan and organised crime, regional organised crime unit, working closely with the Constabulary, are really investing in tackling cybercrime. I'm aware this is a public meeting, so I'll be careful what I say. But in terms of organised crime, it is very rarely restricted to the geographic footprint of the Constabulary. So I think in terms of cybercrime, the way forward, which is why it's not surfaced as a priority in the police and crime plan for Lancashire Constabulary in terms of our geographic policing, but it absolutely has got to be important in terms of our collaboration with the National Serious Crime Agency and the Regional Organised Crime Unit, where we visited on a couple of occasions now, in terms of how we collaborate together, because whilst the victims might be in Lancashire, the perpetrators, because they use it, it's the difference with cybercrime is the perpetrators are not bound by geography, and it blends over into online paedophilia and stalking and issues like that, which is that the perpetrators, the victim might sit with Manchester Constabulary, but the perpetrators don't have to. They can be national or international, and then you get through to money laundering and get through to, and the web just grows and grows. And that's got to be an area of national and regional focus rather than just on a constabulary by constabulary basis.
Chair, just to pick up your point about people who suffer and are victims to this, and everybody in this room will have had an email from someone who's been asking for some money. Currently, we interview next week for our victim service across the county, and that's definitely part of, because people, well, as crimes are recorded, and then we're trying to make sure that they get an appropriate help and advice, but also sort of linking in with our wider agencies to try and give people that confidence that they can report things. And you're right about, I'm embarrassed that I gave money to such a body, because I'm sure we've all had friends and relatives that have sent it to us. So we're trying to ensure that the victim service that we get is able to provide a good service to those individuals. So thank you.
And obviously we're looking forward to welcoming the new cyber headquarters. It sounds we're impressed with developing in Lancashire. That should help us side that.
Thank you, Chair. From brief look at the plan, obviously the priorities look spot on, to be honest. I haven't looked through the whole draft of detail. One thing that I'm just looking at is 74% feeling safe in the communities, and grateful for those details that are going to spread out around whether there's any geographic or demographic hotspots about who feels unsafe. So if that's where, 90% in Westlands feel safe and 60% somewhere else feel unsafe. And so whether we're doing any targeting, either geographic or demographic. So next year we're up to 80% feeling safe. It can count for very little if there's still certain segments not feeling safe. So more a comment than a question.
I mean, absolutely, the data does break it down. Like I said, the main spread, so isn't particularly on gender. There is a bit of a spread on age. There is a bit of a spread on other demographics, but yes, there's a big spread in terms of district areas. What I would add to that, though, is it's not just about how. That's one of the measures. One of the other measures that's in there is about how confident people are that the police would be there if they needed them. So use Ribble Valley as an example, comes out very high in terms of I feel safe, but in terms of confidence of whether if I was being burgled or attacked or whatever, that the police would be there, the confidence is very low, and that's for obvious reasons. So there's more than one measure to take into account. Is what I would say on that. I'll share it up.
Thank you for that. I'm glad you mentioned Ribble Valley because we are safe to a certain extent, but we have a problem with nuisance, and it comes right down to the basics of beginning of crime. Youth nuisance, and you mentioned the youth workers. It hasn't actually filtered out, right through to the small communities. We have budgets in parish precepts to provide youth work. We just don't have the lead or the backup for that. If that could be put into place, we could actually engage more with the youth. Now it's becoming darker. They're up to more mischief, and it is mischief, but it's discerning to the older people and also to the younger children who think it's the thing to do, and so on and so forth. So it's a question of following the leader. And I know it sounds small, but it is frightening to smaller communities and also vulnerable people. And if we can tackle that, we just need a strong lead and advice on how to do that and get that youth program back into our communities, because it was there and all of a sudden, it's gone in the last 10, 15 years.
And those kind of things will pick up through the ASB.
Yes. Yeah. We'd like to see that.
Everywhere I go in Lancashire, ASB is the number one thing in terms of people's, the thing that's first and foremost on people's concerns. And it takes different. It embodies itself in different ways in different places, and the risk and threat, the seriousness of the risk and threat is different in different places, but the impact is the same nonetheless.
Any more comments, questions? Sure. So going back to the recommendation, discussing the plan and provide feedback. So we've got a time scale to do that. So if everybody's happy, we'll move on to Article 6.
Sorry.
Sorry?
Can you just ask you to speak up just a little bit?
Yes, sorry.
A nice quiet voice.
I've not been accused of that before. I will, I shall. Okay, item 6, succession planning. It is, yeah. I'm just a bit baffled as to why it's come now.
Because Kit Malthouse has written to all police and crime commissioners to make sure that they assure their police and crime panels that they have succession planning in place. So that's why it's called, is that they've been asked by the government to put the appropriate succession planning in place. As part of the PCC review, it's been consulted on, and I would say if I was a betting man, largely likely that having deputy police and crime commissioners as political appointments will be mandated and will become part of the role. So every PCC will have a deputy. So I think part of this is aimed at a number of, some PCCs do, some PCCs don't. So there's lots of different arrangements in the place. We've obviously just had a by-election, which cost the taxpayer a lot of money. Relating to a PCC. So we were asked to basically provide that assurance, which in this case to you, the police and crime panel, is the relevant body. So I was thinking, as I was explaining to the chair earlier, I was on drugs raid first thing this morning. I was thinking, if this goes wrong, then Andy's in charge for a panel this morning. So yeah, so basically that's the succession plan in Lancashire is quite straightforward. So if I was incapacitated or resigned or whatever, depending on the closeness to the next election, Andy would take over as Police and Crime Commissioner. If Andy was also incapacitated or didn't want to, or etc., as is recommended in the guidance, then the director of the office stands in and fulfills the statutory duties as the Police and Crime Commissioner until an election can be held to replace the PCC. So basically, the report is to give you the assurance that they are the succession plans that are in place.
Thank
I
you.
don't intend to
That's what
use
baffled me really. I couldn't imagine who would step in if you weren't there actually. So are we all happy with that?
So through you, Chair, do we have to write back and confirm we're happy with that?
I
Do
write-
you, or do we?
I write to them to ensure that we can ask to make sure that we're sure. I think that's correct.
Yes. So the panel agrees to proposed arrangements for succession planning. We're very happy with that. Item 7, performance report. If you want to introduce this, Andrew, I do have a couple of comments. But if you want to,
Yeah, let's get to the right page.
page 16.
So I mean, this is the overarching performance report for the Constabulary. I had a scrutiny meeting with the Chief Constable the other week where we went through overall force performance in quite some detail. And we also had a deep dive review into neighbourhood policing and task forces. So really into the ribs of the Constabulary on the overall performance. The big highlights are in particular demand. So demand through 999 and 101 is at its highest level. We had a day the other week where we received 1,400 calls in a day, which is higher than New Year's Eve normally is. And that is as the world starts to go back to normal, as COVID ends, restrictions are lifted, that demand on police service is really high. The real concern for us going forward is the sheer amount of predominantly 101s, but a degree of 999s that come through that are social issues or health issues that are non-related to policing. It is significantly eating and continues to eat into police demand, and we're having conversations with the Chief Constable about some of the things that we can put in place to start to manage that better. We started to see a shift in crime profiles again as things start to shift back to normal through the lifting of restrictions. We had a very strange year last year in terms of crime profiles where a lot of inquisitive crime dropped off. But domestic abuse in particular rose and other issues like that. So we're starting to see those issues start to revert back. Worryingly though, domestic abuse still remains high, which is why it is a priority. But just to assure the panel, we've had very detailed, and we're going to be, as part of the police and crime plan, proposing some new scrutiny arrangements for the Constabulary as well, that are more transparent in terms of what we need to account on their performance. Do that from memory while I find the paper.
Can I just start the discussion by just asking, item 10, which is Rossendale, which is obviously my area, 19 police officers, a new neighbourhood team, which sounds fantastic. Yes. I'm struggling to find out the actual net increase in Rossendale, because I'm assuming that some of the hybrid officers be redesignated as neighbourhood officers.
Yes, so Rossendale is excellent news. So it's a 100% increase in the force size in Rossendale. So basically, what we have done is given the opportunity for officers to choose whether they, the Constabulary have given them the opportunity to choose whether they want to go onto the neighbourhood or the response team. So what we had obviously previously in Rossendale and still in a number of areas across Lancashire is a hybrid model where all officers are trying to do two jobs at the same time. So they are trying to be neighbourhood officers whilst also being the immediate response for that area. Obviously, each division has TAC Ops and has its own big response unit in terms of local response right there. So what the opportunity was to create 19 posts. So to separate that out and create a neighbourhood team, which is where a number of sergeants, constables and PCSOs sit, like 10 PCSOs. And then on the other side is obviously all police, and that's the response side. So there's been a number of moving around of officers deciding which team they wanted to go on to. Predominantly, most of them wanted to go on to neighbourhood. The neighbourhood was filled. So then basically what we've then been doing is backfilling the response teams, which is why we didn't make the announcement until we did, because we needed a number of those backfills in place for it to be a meaningful announcement. And I believe I'm coming to Rossendale Borough Council for an hour's briefing with all councillors.
Yeah, I don't think the date has been settled, but yeah. So it's, I mean, it's good news, but it makes me ask the question, if Rossendale's got 19 extra officers, what has everybody else got?
We'll wait for the good news, it's on its way. So police uplift programme, so obviously we're delivering the police uplift programme. There are a number of areas where officers are just slotting in, so there's no announcements to make. We're just putting 2 extra in response over there. We're putting 3 in TAC ops there, which is just to bolster where we've got gaps in the areas. What we're now working through with the Constabulary is looking at the overall police uplift programme, looking at the priorities that are emerging in the police and crime plan, and saying, right, when we know we've got tranches of officers effectively coming off that training conveyor belt and are landing, and we've got groups of them, then how do we start to slot those into areas that meet the police and crime plan priority, whether that be neighbourhood policing, whether it be investigations into rape and serious sexual assault, whether it be into roads policing, whatever. So basically what you will see is, as over the next few years, as those police uplift programme officers come in, you'll see more announcements coming forward.
Because I was going to say, I mean, this can't follow from your plan, because we haven't got your plan yet, so this is obviously what was historically.
This is the conversations that we're having today. So I've since, well, one of the first things I asked for on day one of getting elected was how much money do we have and where we put in all the police uplift programme officers, because I have some quite strong views on what I want to do about that. So we've had quite it's been an intense process of conversations and meetings with the force to really start to structure that in terms of what's going to look like.
Okay, anybody, any comments?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Can I first of all say that it was disturbing to read a few, I think it was like a week ago, about the low charging rate in Lancashire for sexual and violent crime, and I think we were put on a par with the Met, which wasn't an invidious sort of stat to read about. So I'm pleased in your police and crime plan that you are going to target this, aren't you? So because it's not only, I mean, you're going to have to engage, I would have thought, with the court service, because I think that's a very integral part of the process. It must be horrible for victims and witnesses to have to wait long periods of time before a case comes before a court. So I would have thought that was a priority, and I was very pleased to read that you picked up on that already.
Absolutely. I mean, Lancashire is not a particular outlier. In some areas, our positive outcome rates are slightly higher than the national average, but the problem is the national average is so low that it's not really anything to be proud of. So yeah, I've already met with the director of the North West Crime Prosecution Service. I've met with Judge Altham, our resident judge in Lancashire at the Crown Courts, and we have a number of conversations about particularly OCG's exploitation and rape and sexual assault, and how we can work better and more closely together across that whole line, from investigation through to arrest, through to charging, through to prosecuting, and then sentencing, and that whole life cycle for the victim as well as for the perpetrator.
Can I just raise just one other point? You refer to in your report to various schemes to fighting ASB, and I would like to think that if you do have a successful scheme, and you've obviously highlighted one in Blackburn, that if it's successful, that it's rolled out, passed on and rolled out in other areas of Lancashire. So that a local team doesn't have to start from scratch. If they have a successful model please, can it be passed through the police service to local areas? Because basically, most likely, most of the problems are fairly similar, aren't they? Youth ASB seems to be fairly, sort of to a TypeScript. It seems to be routine in one area, it's the same in another, maybe variations. But I find it very frustrating that I hear of successful teams, but I don't hear them being rolled out in my area. And I think what's going wrong here, and it would save a lot of time and money.
I think it is right. We need to get better. The model for me is around problem-orientated policing. So that's the model which Lancashire used to many years ago have an excellent reputation for. It still does happen, but there'll be some targeted investment through the police and crime plan around actually some resource around problem-orientated policing to help coordinate best practice across the county. What I would say is that whilst youth ASB or ASB in general might be similar in different places of Lancashire, it's often dissimilar in different ways. So there can be OCG elements of exploitation in some of our areas that take the ASB to a whole different level. So some of it can be purely nuisance, some of it can be where you're starting to see the tentacles of an organised crime gang starting to be exposed through their effectively recruiting of young people in communities and causing that aggravation and providing the drugs and the money, etc. Go with that, which is a very different policing landscape. The other thing that changes in particular is the local government makeup. So, my area as Police and Crime Commissioner covers a county that has districts underneath it and 2 unitary authorities. And the working that goes on and the ways of working in those 3 areas is very different. So sometimes what you might find is actually something is easier in Blackburn because you're just dealing with one council. And that whole team is sat there, same with Blackpool and Project Adder. And also we find is the partners are different. So sometimes you just get a head teacher that's got a real bee in their bonnet about this and really wants to do something about it. And that person has driven something. So actually what we're not looking at there is, well, we might have best practice. It's actually about some individuals who are really willing to go above and beyond and work with the police, because in most cases, antisocial behaviour can't be solved by enforcement on its own. It's all you do to the problem. Actually, a lot of it is around that youth provision. It's around making sure that there's opportunities for educating and engaging with those young people, as well as enforcement, because actually some of them usually find they are ringleaders, and particularly when you've got the tentacles of OCGs in there, you really do need the enforcement stick. But there's lots of other stuff. There's designing out crime in urban spaces. We need to do more of that. So yeah, I would agree. Very long-winded answer. Sorry. That yes, some of it is about sharing best practice. Some of it is about making sure that we are implementing problem-orientated policing in a consistent way across the county. But then some of it will be that the crime itself that's involved is different, and the partnership landscape in that particular area is different. In terms of just going back to the points around criminal justice, one thing that we have done in a decision that we've taken to put some real scrutiny and focus around that whole life cycle is that Andy is going to take over, has taken over now, as chair of the Lancashire Criminal Justice System Board. It was previously the Constabulary that chaired it, which is not the norm across the country. It's usually the political oversight that has that oversight on that board and can put pressure on partners to play their role. So, Andy, do you want to add anything on that? You're always chair of that.
Yes, I did. Thank you. We share your concern, and so we, in terms of all the partners, in terms of speeding up those trials. I'm sure you're all aware, the longer a trial is held off, is postponed, the witnesses are less and less likely to come to court, the more likely it is for the perpetrator to get off, because if the witnesses don't come. There have been video trials. The courts have been struggling through all this COVID period. They've now got a serious backlog that they're trying to work through. We're meeting on a virtually weekly basis now to try and move that along, because it's not just one partner that's responsible. You can imagine there's really quite a long chain of individuals. We've got a very dedicated now focused task group looking at that particular process of actually getting the trials as quick as possible. Maybe on occasion, some of the trials, the more serious ones, if we can get a quicker spot at Carlisle Crown Court, then Carlisle Crown Course will be used, which is not preferable because of the sheer travelling of things. But if looking at individuals and cases, can we move this to Carlisle is an option for us. There are 13 courts available currently in the county, Crown Courts that are available. And again, they're still working on fairly strict COVID regulations to try and obviously keep everybody safe. I have to say, what has been impressed is the willingness for people to make a difference and to say, yeah, we do want to move. And organisations being able to say, well, I know we've got this, but let's try this, let's try that. This afternoon, I'm off to Chorley, to Alistair's Patch, to look at the Witness Care Unit, which is a police unit which looks at those, keeping in contact with those who come to the Crown Court, but we're trying to make sure that all the people, so the victim services, Victims Care Unit, and those who manage witnesses also in court, that there is a proper, safe and caring availability for them, and everybody knows what's going on, because what is happening sometimes, saying people are being phoned up on a Friday, it's all changed, this has been cancelled, what's happened. We're trying to get that as close together, so I'm just trying to reassure you that it's virtually on a weekly basis now. Various individual groups, both myself now as the chair of the Lancashire Criminal Justice Board, and trying to pull this together and work on it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Could I just ask, item 12, which is the reopening of the police station, the counters for the police station, is there a time scale for all boroughs to have?
No, that's a live situation. Obviously,
Right.
to be able to open that 4 months into office is quite an achievement in its own right in the same financial year. But we have announcements to make soon. I don't want to preempt the outcome of conversations that the Chief Constable is having with his staff around some of the others. But I would aim to have them all open within just 12 months.
Right. Would it be reasonable to assume that Waterfoot is going to be one of the
This is
counters?
one of the ones I'm having conversations about.
Anybody else got any comments? Yeah, that's-
Our police station's open, thank you. And quite honestly, you can't believe how delighted we are just to see that presence there. Thank you for that.
Happy. Yeah. Okay, any more comments on the performance report? No? So we've considered it. We'll move on to item 8, which is the decision report.
These are decisions that I've made as Police and Crime Commissioner. The details were made available to the panel, so I'll answer any questions anyone has in the detail. They're all pretty routine, straightforward decisions.
Okay, nothing toward. No. Good. Moving on to item 9, the consultation document. I think I said we have some comments on this.
Yeah, just it's actually very brief. I can just explain the report. It's actually 2 aspects of the report. First is the responses which the chair and the vice chair provided in relation to the panel, and also in relation to the complaints aspect of which is part of the part two of the report which the commission alluded to earlier on. So in the report, is the actual responses that we have provided to the LGA, who are collating the responses. The second aspect is just information. Is the principal counsel have actually received a request through the Home Office about in relation to the commissioner's powers. So basically, they are looking at the part 2 review. But certainly the reference says that they are going to give the commissioner wider powers. The existing legal powers are not sufficient. So the options are the sort of wider, you've got the wide functional powers, similar to what the fire authorities got, or the general power of competence, which what those local authorities have got. So those are the 2 options. The principal authorities that I've got discussion with colleagues in Blackburn. I'm sure the people in Blackburn will do the same thing as well. So we're providing kind of feedback in relation to that. But it would be good if the panel would have any kind of sort of views on that. And I think attached the actual document that came from the Home Office on what those powers are.
Thank you. Any comments? Not one. I think particularly the additional legal powers really important. So we do need to consider papers that would be circulated.
Just before we go on to the general post, just to say on piece I'm very pleased to see that the panel, and obviously I've made my own submission as a commissioner and the panel have made a separate submission. I'm very pleased to see that we have both made the comment around independent chairs and the appropriateness that it should be a political person. And I think, you know, as elected councillors and as an elected commissioner, you have that public authority, you have that public mandate to scrutinise me as an elected official, as commissioner. I know a number of other commissioners and panel members I've spoken to are nervous around the idea that some independent appointed non-elected person could supersede us in terms of our public mandate to deliver on behalf of our residents. I'd just like to say thank you to the panel. I think I think that's a really important point, that actually the chair and the panel should be, like the chair, 100% the panel largely should be people with an elected mandate to scrutinise somebody else with an elected mandate.
I agree. I mean, as long as the PCC is an elected person, the panel should be elected as well.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, with our RAS consult on the part 2, the extra powers and what have you, when is that by? And we obviously could do it in discussion now, or we can go away and put our submissions in as we did previously, which I think was probably a more valid way of doing it. And then you distill anybody's ideas and then recirculate it. That's my preferred way of working. But when does it have to be in?
Yeah, through the chair. In relation to the consultation of the wider panel, the deadline is 27th of October.
Does that give us time to do that submission in writing, or do we need to do it at this meeting now?
Well, I think a discussion would be useful if people have had time to read the papers and review. If not, then we will have to work with the time for.
I mean, generally, I'm fine with most of the proposals, but I think there are certain things I'd like to clarify in writing, which I won't articulate brilliantly here off the top of my head, because obviously officers will probably word it better than I would, is my view on behalf of Joe. So, you know, like I said, there's nothing particularly concerning. I think it's more about the detail and, you know, the safeguards that are going to put in place, isn't it? And I think that's going to probably be the reflection across the country. It's fine in principle because, and there are, I think it refers to different models, doesn't it, that you get in some of the city areas under mayors and what have you, which are more where you've got a concentration of powers. I think that's the bit that we'd like to reflect on, the changes are fine, but with safeguards and with the scrutiny and with the holding to account, which is less of an issue in Lancashire, but I think it's happy, you know, be good to say as well. And therefore, that's my own future.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you have any comments on?
Yeah, I mean, it's the general powers of competence. I don't think they don't change the role of commissioner in terms of my ability to scrutinise the chief constable or the chief constable to account, deliver working in partnership. The main area I think that is of interest to police and crime commissioners is what it means we can do with the estate, and in terms of the development, in terms of looking at different ways of generating income streams, etc. In the same way that local authorities do. I think that's the main area of development. But obviously, as Alistair rightly says, that needs the appropriate balances and checks that go with it as well, of course. So yeah, so I think it's my view is it's not coalition stuff. This isn't down the hill stuff for me. It's not stuff that's going to change policing radically overnight or change the role of the commissioner radically overnight. What it is giving is it's giving the office of the police and crime commissioner the opportunity to do things differently in terms of budgeting and estates and resource if they so should wish. And Alistair's also right. We're on a roll of agreeing here, Alistair.
Keep it going to Friday.
Yeah, the metropolitan areas are more interested in this than the non-metropolitan areas.
And therefore, Chair, my question a little bit is, in the past FRAs as well, the fire authorities has created tension in Lancashire with discussions that have happened previously, whether well managed or badly managed, discussed. Is that allows a certain platform for doing that as well, doesn't it? Which I think is the direction of travel from the government, but we should be alive to that as well.
So I think any more comments directed to ourselves?
By when, excuse me, Jeff?
If you could probably let me have by this week. Okay, because in terms of coordination, and there happens to coordinate this sort of mountain officers at Blackpool and Lancashire. I'm sure they want to see the same thing as well. So I think when I'm colleagues in Blackburn, I could obviously take sort of those comments into account. I think I'm sure Blackburn should like to do something.
Everybody okay with that timescale? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, item 10. These groups, we've had some email exchanges about these. We've established that there are two task and finish groups that interest councillors. The first one, Councillor Berry suggested setting up a task and finish group to look at the 101 service, including a visit to the control room. And I know Councillor Bronski has said he'd be interested. Yeah. And I think we've decided 3 people is plenty for task and finish group really. So if anybody else would like to join that task and finish group, you can contact Councillor Berry. And the second one is to pick up where we left off with the neighbourhood policing last year. Councillor Marinel, who isn't here today, is happy to take that forward and hopefully complete a report by Christmas. I think that's the plan. So again, if anybody's interested in sitting on that task and finish group, you could contact Councillor Marinel or self or Phil, and we can coordinate that. That would be useful. And I think really 2 task and finish groups is sufficient for the time being. Everybody happy with that? Good. Item 11, monitoring of complaints. Do we have any update?
Just a very brief, just received 1 complaint, and there was some liaison with the Commissioner's office. And I've requested further information on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Item 12, urgent business. I've not been notified of any urgent business. So dated next meeting is Monday, the 6th of December. So thank you very much for your attendance. And I did forget to point out there will be webcam, so it was a public meeting, so, but everybody's in perfect behaved. So I'll remember next time to point it out. Thank you very much. Thank you.